Lila Hart learned early that silence bought survival, but the day a stranger's hand caught her stepmother's wrist mid-swing, everything she knew about the world shattered. The cowboy with dust on his boots didn't ask questions. He didn't make speeches. He opened his wallet and said 5 words that froze the room. "I'll buy her. Name your price." Lila's scream died in her throat. She wasn't cattle. She wasn't property. But when Cal Mercer's quiet eyes met hers, something in his steady gaze whispered a truth her battered heart couldn't yet believe. Sometimes rescue doesn't look like you expect. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Lila's story travels. And if her fight for freedom moves you, hit that like button and stay until the end. The cottonwood switch whistled through the air. Lila Hart had learned, somewhere between her 13th and 16th birthday, that the sound came before the pain. That half-second of warning was all the mercy the world offered. She braced, shoulders hunched, fingers white-knuckled against the kitchen table's rough edge. The wood bit into her palms. Better that small hurt than the spreading fire across her shoulders. The switch connected. She didn't make a sound. "Worthless," Vera Hart hissed, her breath sharp with the smell of gin and bitterness. "Just like your mother, pretty face, empty head, and hands that can't do a damn thing right." The beans had scorched, just the bottom layer, black and bitter against the cast-iron pot Lila had been stirring for the better part of an hour. She'd looked away for 30 seconds, maybe less, to grab the cornbread from the oven before it burned. The choice had been which mistake to make. She'd chosen wrong. She always chose wrong. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Lila lifted her head. Vera Hart stood with the cottonwood switch still raised, her face flushed red from exertion and alcohol, her hair escaping its pins in wild gray streaks. She'd been beautiful once, maybe. Now she was just hard, sharp angles and sharper words, a woman who'd married Lila's father for his modest ranch and spent the 3 years since his death turning that property into profit and his daughter into unpaid labor. "Yes, ma'am," Lila whispered. "Speak up. Or are you too stupid to even—" The switch rose again. Lila closed her eyes. The blow never landed. The silence stretched so long that Lila opened her eyes, confused. Vera stood frozen, her arm caught mid-swing, her wrist circled by a hand that looked carved from the same rough wood as the fence posts outside. The hand was scarred across the knuckles, weathered dark by sun and work, and completely still, holding Vera's wrist with the casual certainty of a man who knew exactly how strong he was and exactly how much strength to use. Lila's gaze traveled up the arm to a broad shoulder, past a dust-covered shirt, to a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so carefully empty of expression. The man was tall, lean in the way of someone who worked from dawn to dark, with brown hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creekstone, gray-green and unreadable. He looked at Vera Hart like she was a snake he'd found in his bedroll, inconvenient, potentially dangerous, requiring immediate attention. "That's enough," he said. His voice was quiet. Western quiet. The kind that didn't need volume because it expected to be heard the first time. Vera jerked her wrist, but the stranger's grip didn't budge. "Get your goddamn hand off me. This is my house. My business. Your house." The man glanced around the kitchen, taking in the scorched pot, the sparse shelves, the flour sack curtains, the girl with bruises layering her arms like ugly bracelets. "Your business." His eyes settled back on Vera, and something cold moved through them. "Step back." "Who the hell do you think—" "Step back." This time Vera heard what Lila had already recognized, the absolute certainty that this man would make her step back, one way or another, and she could choose whether it happened easy or hard. Vera stumbled backward when he released her wrist, the switch clattering to the floor. Lila stood frozen against the table, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Strangers didn't walk into Vera Hart's kitchen. Neighbors had learned years ago that the widow Hart didn't welcome interference, and the girl was none of their concern anyway. Just a stepdaughter. Not blood. Not worth the trouble. The stranger shifted his attention to Lila, and she forced herself not to flinch. His gaze moved across her face, her arms, her shoulders, cataloging, she realized, not leering. reading the evidence the way a tracker reads sign. Your girl? He asked Vera, though he kept his eyes on Lila. Stepdaughter. Vera's voice had gone hard and sharp. And she's got work to finish, so if you're selling something, I'm not selling. The man finally looked back at Vera. I'm buying. Silence dropped through the kitchen like a stone into water. Lila felt the words as a physical shock. Her hands gripped the table's edge harder. What? Vera's confusion was genuine. The girl. The stranger reached into his vest pocket, pulled out a worn leather wallet. I'll buy her. Name a price. No. The word tore out of Lila before she could stop it. No, I'm not. You can't. Easy. He held up one hand, palm out, the gesture somehow both calming and commanding. His eyes found hers again. I'm not doing what you think I'm doing. She's not for sale, Lila said, her voice shaking now. I'm not property. I'm not. You're right, he said simply. You're not. But your stepmother here needs to believe you are, just for the next 5 minutes. Can you trust me that long? Trust. The word was almost funny. Lila hadn't trusted anyone since her father died, and look where that caution had gotten her, cornered in a kitchen by a woman who hated her and a stranger who wanted to buy her like a horse. But there was something in his face, not kindness exactly, something harder than that, something that looked like understanding earned the painful way. Before Lila could answer, Vera laughed, a harsh barking sound. You're serious, huh? Always. She's family. I can't just... You can. He pulled out a fold of bills, counted them with practiced efficiency. She's fed, I'm guessing, but barely. Clothed in your cast-offs, working dawn to dark for no wages. You keep her because she's useful, not because you love her. He set the money on the table. This is more than you'd get from her labor in the next year. Probably more than you'd get if you contracted her out proper. Vera stared at the money. Lila watched her stepmother's face shift, surprised a calculation to something uglier. Greed. How much? Vera's voice had gone quiet. Enough. The stranger's tone didn't change. More than fair. People would talk, selling my own, then tell them she ran off, tell them she got married, tell them whatever story lets you sleep at night. He pushed the money an inch closer. But we both know you don't care what people say. You care about profit. This is profit. Clean, simple, no more mouths to feed or backs to break. Lila felt something crack in her chest. He was right. Every word was true, and hearing it spoken out loud in that calm, factual voice made something inside her want to break. Vera reached for the money. No. Lila stepped away from the table. You can't. I won't. Lila. The way he said her name stopped her. He'd used it like he knew her, though she'd never seen him before in her life. 5 minutes. Then you can make your own choice. I swear it. You're lying. I'm not. He held her gaze. But you don't know me well enough to believe that yet. So I'm asking you to gamble. 5 minutes of trust for a chance at something different than this. He gestured at the kitchen, at Vera, at the cottonwood switch on the floor. Can't promise it'll be better. But I can promise it'll be different. Vera snatched the bills, counted them twice, her lips moving. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with something that might have been relief or might have been malice. She's yours. Take her. Get your things, the stranger said to Lila. I don't have things. Then get whatever matters. Lila stood paralyzed. This was happening too fast. Men didn't walk into houses and buy girls. This was a fever dream, a panic, something wrong that her exhausted mind had conjured while the switch fell and... Now, Lila... His voice stayed gentle, but there was steel underneath. Whatever you want to take with you, get it now. We're leaving in 2 minutes whether you're ready or not. The finality in his words jolted her into motion. She stumbled past him, through the narrow doorway, into the room that had been hers. A closet, really, barely wide enough for the cornhusk mattress and the wooden crate that held everything she owned. Her mother's hairbrush, silver-backed and tarnished, the only pretty thing she'd ever touched. One spare dress, gray homespun, patched at the elbows. Her father's book, a collection of Walt Whitman poems that he'd read to her before Vera came, before everything turned hard and hungry. She shoved them into a flour sack with shaking hands, her mind racing. This was insane. She was leaving with a stranger who'd paid cash money for her like she was livestock. He could be worse than Vera. Probably was worse. Men who bought girls didn't have good intentions. But when she came back to the kitchen, he was standing exactly where she'd left him, patient as a mountain, and his eyes tracked to the flour sack without judgment. That all? That's all there is. He nodded once, then turned to Vera. She's got wages owed. 3 years of work. She got room and board, Vera snapped. Room and board she earned 10 times over. He pulled out his wallet again, added 2 more bills to the pile on the table. That's for her labor. Don't spend it all on gin. Vera's face flushed purple, but she took the money. The stranger offered his hand to Lila, not grabbing, not demanding, just extended in the space between them like a bridge she could choose to cross or not. My name's Cal Mercer, he said. I've got a horse outside. Can you ride? Not well? You'll ride with me then. We've got ground to cover before dark. Lila looked at his hand, looked at Vera's face, tight with greed, and something that might have been triumph. Looked at the cottonwood switch on the floor. She put her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. He didn't squeeze, didn't pull, just held her hand steady while she found her balance. Let's go, Cal said. They walked out together. Vera didn't say goodbye. The door swung shut behind them, and Lila heard the lock click home like a cell door closing, except this time she was on the outside. Cal's horse was a big bay gelding with kind eyes and a patient stance, ground-tied by the fence. Cal moved with the easy economy of someone who'd spent his life around livestock, checking the cinch, adjusting the stirrup, swinging into the saddle with practiced grace. He reached down. Foot in the stirrup, hand on my arm. I'll pull you up. Lila hesitated. She'd ridden exactly twice in her life. Once on her father's old mare before he died, once on a borrowed mule when Vera needed supplies hauled from town. Neither experience had been graceful. I've got you, Cal said. You won't fall. She put her foot in the stirrup, gripped his forearm, solid as oak, and let him pull her up behind the saddle. For a terrifying second, she was airborne, unbalanced, certain she'd tumble straight off the other side. Then Cal's hand steadied her hip, and she was settled, perched awkwardly behind him with her flour sack clutched to her chest. Hold on to my belt, he said, or around my waist if you're more comfortable. We'll start slow. Lila gripped his belt with her free hand, her knuckles white. The horse shifted beneath them, and she bit back a gasp. Cal made a soft clicking sound, and the gelding moved forward, smooth, easy, like floating. They walked down the dirt road that led away from Vera's house, away from the well and the chicken coop and the vegetable garden Lila had tended every morning since her father died. She didn't look back. The sun hung low over the western hills, painting everything gold and amber. The air smelled like dust and sage and horse, and somewhere in the distance a meadowlark sang its falling liquid song. Lila had heard that sound every day of her life, but right now it sounded like a language she'd forgotten she knew. Where are we going? She finally asked. Town first, Cal said. Red Hollow, about 2 hours' ride. And then? Then we'll see. It wasn't an answer, but Lila was too tired to push. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last hour was draining away, leaving her hollow and shaking. She pressed her forehead against Cal's shoulder blade, just for a second, just to steady herself, and tried not to think about what she'd just done. What he'd just done. What any of it meant. They rode in silence for a long time, the horse's hooves steady on the packed earth, the sun sliding lower. Lila's arms ached from holding herself rigid, afraid that if she relaxed she'd fall, or worse, that this strange, impossible escape would dissolve like smoke. You can breathe, Cal said eventually. I'm not going to hurt you. You bought me. I paid your stepmother to let you leave. There's a difference. Is there? Cal was quiet for a moment. The saddle creaked. The horse snorted softly, blowing flies from its nose. I'm going to explain something, he said finally, and I need you to listen all the way through before you decide I'm lying. Can you do that? Lila didn't answer. I'll take that as a maybe, Cal said, and she heard something in his voice that might have been humor if the situation weren't so grim. Here's the truth. I didn't buy you. I bought your stepmother's cooperation. I paid her to stop hitting you, and let you walk out that door without a fight. The money was grease on a stuck hinge. Nothing more. That's the same thing. It's not. You're not owned. You're not owed. In about 2 hours, we're going to sit down with a judge in Red Hollow, and you're going to sign a contract, if you want to. 6 months of work for fair wages, room and board, and the legal right to leave any time you choose. Everything in writing, everything witnessed, everything on your terms. Lila's hands tightened on his belt. Why? Why what? Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. The silence stretched long enough that Lila thought he wouldn't answer. The landscape rolled past, scrub grass and scattered juniper, the hills going purple in the fading light. Somewhere overhead, a hawk screamed, hunting. I knew a girl once, Cal said quietly. Long time ago. She lived in a house where violence was the weather. Some days worse than others, but always there. People knew. Neighbors, sheriff, the minister at the church. Everyone knew, and everyone decided it wasn't their business. Lila waited. She died when she was 14, Cal continued. Fell down the stairs, her father said, broke her neck, and maybe she did fall. Or maybe she got pushed. Or maybe she jumped because anything was better than another day in that house. His shoulders rose and fell with a breath. I was 12. I didn't understand why the adults wouldn't help. I kept waiting for someone to do something, anyone, but they just kept walking past, kept minding their own business, kept deciding she wasn't worth the trouble of getting involved. What was her name? Mary. Cal's voice went rough on the word. Mary Teresa Mercer, my sister. Lila closed her eyes. The ache in her chest sharpened into something that felt like understanding, painful and clear. I can't save her, Cal said. Can't go back and make different choices. But I can choose right now not to be the kind of man who walks past when someone's getting hurt. I can choose to be the person I needed when I was 12 years old and didn't know how to stop what was happening. I'm not your sister. No, you're not. You're Lila Hart, and you deserve better than a stepmother who beats you for burned beans. That's all the reason I need. They rode on through the gathering dusk. Lila's grip on Cal's belt loosened slightly, her breathing coming easier. She still didn't trust him, couldn't afford to, not yet, but something in his story rang true, the kind of true that lived in scars and old grief. The judge, she said eventually. What if I don't want to sign? Then I'll pay for a room at the boarding house for a week, give you enough money to get by, and you can figure out your next step. No obligations. You just let me go? You were never mine to keep. Lila turned that over in her mind, testing it for weak spots, for the trap she was sure must be hidden somewhere in the words. But she couldn't find it. Maybe she was too tired. Maybe she was too desperate to believe in the possibility of something that wasn't pain. Or maybe, just maybe, Cal Mercer meant what he said. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. Full dark had fallen by the time they rode into Red Hollow. The town was small, a main street of false-fronted buildings, a general store, a saloon spilling lamplight and piano music into the street, a stable with its doors still open. People moved along the boardwalks, their faces indistinct in the shadows, their voices carrying on the cool evening air. Cal guided the horse to a 2-story building near the end of the street. A painted sign over the door read, "Boarding house, clean rooms, decent food, no whiskey." "Wait here," Cal said, swinging down from the saddle. He moved to Lila's side, offered his hand. "I'll help you down." This time she took his hand without hesitation, letting him steady her as she slid awkwardly from the horse's back. Her legs nearly buckled. 2 hours of riding had left her stiff and aching, but Cal's grip held firm until she found her balance. "I need to stable the horse," he said. "Can you wait inside? Tell Mrs. Cooper you're with Cal Mercer. She'll get you settled." Lila clutched her flour sack and nodded. Cal studied her face for a moment, then seemed satisfied with whatever he saw there. He gathered the reins and led the bay toward the stable, his boots scuffing softly against the dirt. Lila turned to face the boarding house. Light glowed warm behind curtained windows. The door stood slightly ajar and she could hear women's voices inside. Someone laughing, someone else scolding gently about muddy boots. Normal sounds, safe sounds. She climbed the steps and pushed the door open. The front room was small but tidy, with a braided rug on the floor and a desk tucked beneath the stairs. A woman in her 50s looked up from a ledger book, her face round and kind beneath a cap of silver-threaded brown hair. "Help you, dear?" Lila's voice stuck. She swallowed and tried again. "I'm with Cal Mercer. He said to tell you—" "Oh, Cal's back!" The woman, Mrs. Cooper presumably, came around the desk with a smile. "And he's brought company. Well, that's fine. Let me get you—" She stopped, her smile fading as she got a better look at Lila's face. Lila knew what she was seeing, the bruises on her jaw, the marks on her arms, the hollow exhaustion in her eyes. She lifted her chin, refusing to be ashamed of what had been done to her. Mrs. Cooper's expression shifted into something fierce and gentle at once. "You poor lamb. Come here. Come sit down. When did you last eat?" I don't remember." "Well, that won't do at all." Mrs. Cooper guided Lila to a chair by the cold fireplace, her hands gentle on Lila's shoulders. "You just rest a minute. I'm going to get you some bread and butter, maybe some cold chicken if you can manage it. Cal's likely gone to see Judge Rowan, which means you'll have a wait ahead of you, and you shouldn't face it on an empty stomach." "You know Judge Rowan?" "Everyone knows the judge, dear. He's the one keeps this town from falling into lawlessness and stupidity." Mrs. Cooper patted Lila's hand. "If Cal's taking you to him, you're in good hands. Best hands in Red Hollow, truth be told." She bustled off toward what Lila assumed was the kitchen, leaving Lila alone in the quiet room. The chair was soft, softer than anything Lila had sat in for years. The air smelled like bread and soap and coffee. Through the window, she could see the street, see people moving about their evening business, see the normal flow of a life that didn't include switches and violence and fear. She set her flour sack on the floor beside the chair and let herself, for just a moment, pretend this was real. Mrs. Cooper returned with a plate piled high, bread thick with butter, cold chicken, a wedge of yellow cheese, an apple cut into slices. She pressed it into Lila's hands with a no-nonsense expression. "Eat," she commanded. "Slowly, if your stomach's not used to full meals. And don't you worry about pain. Cal's credit is good here." Lila ate. The bread tasted like heaven. The chicken was tender and savory. The cheese was sharp and rich. She forced herself to go slow, to chew thoroughly, even though her hollow stomach wanted her to wolf everything down like an animal. She was halfway through the apple when the door opened and Cal stepped inside, hat in hand. "Judge Rowan can see us now," he said, "if you're ready." Lila set the plate aside and stood, brushing crumbs from her dress. "I'm ready." Cal's eyes flicked to the empty plate, and something in his expression eased. "Good. It's just across the street. His office is above the Land Claims Bureau. Won't take long." They stepped back out into the night. The temperature had dropped, and Lila shivered in her thin dress. Cal noticed, shrugged out of his coat, and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. "I don't need—" "You're cold," he said simply. "I'm not. Keep it." The coat smelled like leather and dust and horse, and it was still warm from his body. Lila pulled it tighter around herself and followed Cal across the rutted street to a narrow building squeezed between the land office and a milliner's shop. Cal led her up an outside staircase to a door marked J. Rowan, Circuit Judge. He knocked twice, firm and clear. "Come in," a voice called. The office was small and crowded with books, law volumes stacked on shelves, piled on chairs, spread open across a massive oak desk. Behind the desk sat a man who looked to be in his 60s, lean and sharp-eyed, with a shock of white hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd spent more time on horseback than behind a bench. Judge Rowan looked up from a document he'd been reading, his gaze moving from Cal to Lila and back again. Something shifted in his expression, recognition maybe, or understanding. "Cal Mercer," he said. "Been a while." "Judge," Cal removed his hat. "This is Lila Hart. She needs your help." "Does she now?" Judge Rowan stood, came around the desk, and pulled a chair forward. "Sit down, Miss Hart. Let's talk." Lila sat in the chair Judge Rowan had offered, her hands folded tight in her lap, Cal's coat still wrapped around her shoulders. The judge returned to his seat behind the desk, settling into it with the careful movements of a man whose bones had been broken and healed more than once. He studied her face with eyes that had seen every kind of human cruelty and probably most varieties of human kindness, too. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice carrying the rough edges of age and tobacco, "I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need honest answers. Can you do that for me?" Lila nodded. "Words, please? I need to hear you say it." "Yes, sir." "Good." Judge Rowan leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Cal here tells me you've been living with your stepmother, Vera Hart, out past Copper Ridge?" "Yes, sir." "And how long has she been your guardian?" 3 years, since my father died." "I'm sorry for your loss." The words were automatic but not insincere. "During those 3 years, how would you characterize your stepmother's treatment of you?" Lila's throat went tight. She could feel Cal's presence behind her. He'd taken up a position near the door, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, silent as stone. She didn't look at him. Looking at him would break whatever fragile control she had left. "She fed me," Lila said carefully. "Gave me a place to sleep." "That's not what I asked." Judge Rowan's eyes didn't waver. "I asked how she treated you." The silence stretched. Through the window, Lila could hear the piano from the saloon down the street, playing something jaunty and out of tune. Someone laughed, a woman's voice, bright with whiskey or joy or both. "She hit me," Lila said finally, "when I made mistakes, when the work wasn't done right. Sometimes when she was just angry at the world and I was there." "What did she hit you with?" "Hands, mostly. A cottonwood switch. Once a broom handle, but it broke." Judge Rowan's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened slightly against each other. "How often?" "I stopped counting. Daily? Weekly? 2, 3 times a week. More if I burned something or broke something or—" Lila stopped, swallowed hard. "More if she'd been drinking." "Did anyone know? Neighbors, townspeople, the sheriff?" "I don't know, maybe. No one said anything if they did." "Did you ever ask for help?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Lila felt the ripples of it spread through her chest, cold and bitter. "Once," she said. "I asked the minister's wife after church, showed her the bruises. She told me to pray harder and honor my parents." Judge Rowan made a sound low in his throat that might have been disgust. "Which minister?" "Does it matter?" "It might." The judge pulled a piece of paper from a drawer, dipped a pen in ink. "I'll want his name before you leave, along with anyone else who knew and did nothing." "Why?" "Because this town's got a choice to make, Miss Hart. It can be the kind of place where violence against the vulnerable is everyone's business, or it can be the kind of place where people turn their backs and pretend righteousness is the same as goodness. I prefer the former." He made a notation on the paper. "Now, Cal tells me he paid your stepmother to release you from her household. Is that accurate?" Lila glanced back at Cal. He met her eyes, his face unreadable. "He gave her money," Lila said. "Called it buying me. But he said it was just to make her let me go." "And did you want to go?" The question was simple. The answer should have been simple too. But Lila found herself frozen, the words tangled somewhere between her heart and her mouth. Wanting implied choice. Wanting implied she had any right to decide what happened to her own life. "Miss Hart," Judge Rowan's voice gentled slightly, "did you want to leave your stepmother's house?" "Yes." The word came out as a whisper. "I need you to say it louder, for the record." "Yes," stronger this time. "Yes, I wanted to leave." "Did Cal Mercer force you to come with him, threaten you, make promises he wouldn't keep?" "No." "Did he touch you inappropriately or suggest anything improper?" Heat flooded Lila's face. "No, he's been respectful." Judge Rowan nodded, made another note. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm drawing up a contract of employment between you and Cal Mercer. 6 months of domestic work, cooking, cleaning, general household management, in exchange for wages at the standard rate, which is currently $15 a month plus room and board. The contract will stipulate that you can terminate the arrangement at any time with 1 week's notice, no questions asked, and no money owed back. It will also stipulate that Mr. Mercer cannot terminate the arrangement without cause. and that any cause must be verified by myself or another circuit judge. Does that sound acceptable to you? $15 a month. Lila had never held that much money in her life. She'd never held any money, period. Vera had kept every cent her father had left, claiming it was needed for household expenses. I can leave whenever I want? Lila asked. Whenever you want. This isn't indentured servitude. This is a job. And if... Lila stopped, uncertain how to phrase the fear that crawled through her mind. If he changes his mind about being respectful? Judge Rowan's eyes cut to Cal, sharp as flint. Then you come directly to me, and I'll handle it. And Cal knows that if he lays a hand on you in violence or in lust, I'll have him in front of a magistrate so fast his head will spin. Don't you, Cal? Yes, sir, Cal said quietly. There's also the matter of sleeping arrangements, the judge continued. Cal's informed me he'll be putting you up at Mrs. Cooper's boarding house, separate room, until more permanent arrangements can be made at his ranch. That acceptable? Yes, sir. Good. Then let's get this written up proper. Judge Rowan pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, his pen scratching across it with practiced efficiency. He wrote in a clear, strong hand, pausing occasionally to consult a law book or make a correction. Lila watched, fascinated despite herself, as her life transformed into legal language. Parties of the first part and second part, terms and conditions, rights and responsibilities. After 10 minutes, Judge Rowan blotted the document carefully and turned it so Lila could read it. Take your time, he said. Read every word. Make sure you understand what you're agreeing to. If you can't read well, I'll read it aloud. I can read. Lila's father had taught her that much before he died. One of the few gifts Vera hadn't been able to take away. She bent over the document, forcing herself to focus on each line despite her exhaustion. The contract was exactly as Judge Rowan had described. 6 months. $15 monthly, room and board provided. Either party could terminate with proper notice. There was even a clause about medical care. If Lila became ill or injured, Cal would be responsible for the doctor's fees. At the bottom were 2 signature lines. If you sign, Judge Rowan said, you're entering into a legal agreement. That means you've got legal standing. You're not property. You're not charity. You're an employee with rights that the law will uphold. Understand? Lila picked up the pen he offered. Her hand shook slightly, making the nib waver above the paper. This is real? She asked. I sign this and I'm free? Free as any working person is, the judge said, which is to say, you'll owe honest work for honest pay, but your body and your choices are your own. No one can hit you. No one can sell you. No one can tell you where to go or who to be so long as you're not breaking the law or shirking your contracted obligations. Lila pressed the nib to paper and signed her name, Lila Marie Hart, in the careful script her father had taught her. The letters were shaky but legible. Judge Rowan took the document, added his own signature as witness, then gestured to Cal. Come sign, Mr. Mercer. Cal crossed the room in 3 long strides, took the pen, and signed his name below Lila's. His handwriting was simpler than hers, blocky and plain, but clear. The judge blotted the signatures, then pulled out a metal stamp and pressed it firmly onto the bottom of the page. When he lifted it, an official seal gleamed in wet ink, the circuit court's mark. There. Judge Rowan folded the document, slid it into an envelope, and handed it to Lila. Keep this somewhere safe. You'll need it if anyone questions your status or if you need to prove employment. There's also a copy for the court records and one for Cal. Lila clutched the envelope like it was made of gold, paper, ink, a stamp. Somehow these simple things had transformed her from a thing to be bartered into a person with rights. One more thing, the judge said. Miss Hart, you mentioned a minister's wife who turned you away. I want that name. Reverend Talbot's wife, Sarah Talbot. Judge Rowan wrote it down. Anyone else? The sheriff came by once, 2 years ago. A neighbor must have complained about the noise. Vera was shouting. I was crying. He looked at my face, asked if everything was all right. Vera said I'd fallen. He left. Sheriff Braddock? Yes, sir. The judge's mouth thinned into a hard line. Noted. Cal, get this girl to Mrs. Cooper's and make sure she eats a proper meal. I'll see you both in the morning to finalize the travel arrangements. Travel arrangements? Lila looked between them. My ranch is a 2-day ride from here, Cal said. We'll need supplies and a wagon. Judge Rowan's going to draft a letter of introduction in case we run into any trouble on the road. Makes it clear you're employed legal and proper. Why would we run into trouble? Cal and the judge exchanged a look that made Lila's stomach tighten. Because, Judge Rowan said carefully, your stepmother might decide she made a bad bargain, or someone else might see a young woman traveling with a man and make assumptions. The letter provides legal protection. Think of it as armor made of words. Lila nodded slowly, though fear crept cold through her veins. She'd thought leaving Vera's house was the end of danger, not the beginning of new kinds. Don't borrow tomorrow's trouble, Cal said, as if reading her thoughts. Tonight you sleep safe. That's enough for now. They left the judge's office and descended the narrow stairs into the night. The air had gone sharp and cold, promising frost by morning. Cal walked beside Lila in comfortable silence, matching his long stride to her shorter one. When they reached the boarding house, warm light spilled from the windows, and the smell of baking bread drifted out. Mrs. Cooper met them at the door, her face lighting up when she saw them. All settled with the judge? All settled, Cal confirmed. Can you set Miss Hart up in a room for the night? I'll cover the costs. Of course, and I've got stew on the stove, proper beef stew with potatoes and carrots. You'll both stay for supper? I need to see to my horse, Cal said, but Miss Hart should eat. I'm not hungry, Lila lied. Her stomach was a knot of anxiety too tight for food. Cal gave her a look that suggested he knew exactly how hungry she was. Eat anyway. You'll need your strength for the road. Before Lila could argue, he tipped his hat to Mrs. Cooper and headed back out into the darkness. The door swung shut behind him, leaving Lila alone with the landlady's kind, knowing eyes. Come on, dear, Mrs. Cooper said. Let's get you settled. She led Lila up a narrow staircase to the second floor, down a hallway lit by oil lamps, to a door near the end. The room beyond was small but clean. A proper bed with a quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a window with real glass and curtains that matched the quilt. There's a lock on the inside of the door, Mrs. Cooper said, pointing. No one has a key but you. Cal insisted on that particular. Lila stared at the lock. Such a small thing, such an enormous gift. Privy's out back, but there's a chamber pot under the bed if you need it in the night. I'll bring up some hot water for washing, and then you come down for that stew. No arguments. She bustled out before Lila could respond. Lila set her flour sack on the bed. Her possessions looked even more pathetic against the clean quilt, and moved to the window. From here she could see the main street of Red Hollow, the shapes of people moving through lamplight, the mountains rising dark against the stars. A knock sounded. Mrs. Cooper returned with a steaming pitcher, which she poured into the basin. There's soap and a cloth on the stand. Take your time, wash up proper. I'll expect you downstairs in 20 minutes. When she left again, Lila approached the basin like it might bite. Steam rose from the water, curling in the cool air. She dipped her fingers in. Hot, almost too hot, perfect. She hadn't had hot water for washing since before her father died. She stripped off her dress, wincing as the fabric pulled against bruises. The washcloth was soft and clean. The soap smelled like lavender. She scrubbed her face, her neck, her arms. Watching the water turn gray with dirt and dried blood from a cut on her elbow she hadn't noticed until now. When she'd washed as much as she could reach, she put on her spare dress and studied herself in the small mirror above the washstand. The face that looked back was gaunt, hollow-eyed, marked with fading bruises across her jaw and cheekbone. Her dark hair hung limp and tangled. She looked like exactly what she was, a girl who'd survived rather than lived. But there was something else there, too, something new. A glimmer of something that might have been hope, if hope weren't such a dangerous thing to name. She went downstairs. The dining room held a long table with benches on either side. 3 other boarders were already seated, 2 men in working clothes and a woman in a faded but clean dress. They looked up when Lila entered, their curiosity frank but not unkind. "Sit anywhere you like, dear," Mrs. Cooper called from the kitchen. "Stew's coming right up." Lila chose a seat at the end of the table, as far from the others as she could manage without being obvious about it. One of the men nodded to her in greeting. The woman smiled. "You're Cal Mercer's girl?" the woman asked. "I work for him," Lila corrected quickly. "I'm his employee." "Ah." The woman's smile didn't falter. "I'm Dorothy. That's Frank and Charlie. We all work at the timber mill down the creek. Lila said. Mrs. Cooper emerged with a tray laden with bowls of stew, a basket of bread, and a crock of butter. She distributed the food with brisk efficiency, setting an extra-large portion in front of Lila. Eat up, she commanded. You look like you could use some meat on your bones. The stew was thick and rich, swimming with chunks of beef and vegetables. The bread was fresh and warm. Lila ate slowly, aware of the others watching her with a mix of curiosity and pity that made her skin crawl. She knew what they saw. Another girl in trouble, another victim, another story of casual cruelty in a world full of it. Cal Mercer's a good man, Frank said after a while, his voice gruff but sincere. Little rough around the edges, but solid. You'll be safe with him. How do you know? The question came out sharper than Lila intended. Frank didn't take offense. Known him near 10 years. He brought a family through a blizzard once, kept them alive in his cabin for 3 weeks when they would have froze otherwise. Didn't ask for thanks or payment, just did what needed doing. He sopped up gravy with his bread. That's the kind of man he is, does what needs doing. He pay you to say that? Lila regretted the words immediately, but exhaustion and fear had stripped away her filter. Frank laughed, a deep rumbling sound. Hell no. Just telling you what I know so you don't spend the whole night worrying yourself sick. Worry if you want, that's your right, but know that you landed with one of the good ones. Lila looked down at her stew, her throat tight. Thank you, she managed. They finished the meal in comfortable silence. When the bowls were empty, Mrs. Cooper shooed everyone away from the table and began clearing dishes. Lila moved to help, but the landlady waved her off. You've had a long day. Go rest. Tomorrow's coming soon enough. Lila climbed the stairs to her room, her legs heavy with exhaustion. Inside, she locked the door, feeling a fierce satisfaction at the solid click, and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was soft, the quilt clean and smelling of sunshine. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. She pulled out her mother's hairbrush, ran her fingers over the tarnished silver. Her mother had been dead for 5 years now, taken by fever when Lila was 11. Her father had lasted another 2 years before his heart gave out, leaving Lila in Vera's cold hands. I got out, Mama, Lila whispered to the empty room. I don't know if it's going to be all right, but I got out. The brush gave no answer. Lila set it carefully on the washstand, changed into her night shift, and climbed into bed. The sheets were cool and clean against her skin. The pillow cradled her head like a gentle hand. She'd expected to lie awake all night, her mind racing with questions and fears. Instead, sleep took her under like a wave, deep and dark and blessedly dreamless. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon drifting up from downstairs. For one confused moment, she thought she was still at Vera's, and panic spiked through her. She'd overslept. She'd be punished. She needed to get to the kitchen before... Then she saw the lock on the door. Saw her contract lying on the washstand where she'd left it. Saw her flour sack with her few possessions. Real. This was real. She dressed quickly, splashed water on her face, and went downstairs. Mrs. Cooper was setting out breakfast. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy that smelled like heaven. Morning, dear. Sleep well? Yes, ma'am. Better than I have in years. Good. Sit down and eat. Cal will be here soon to collect you. The words sent a flutter of nervousness through Lila's stomach, but she obeyed. The other boarders had already eaten and left for their work. Lila had the table to herself, which suited her fine. She was halfway through her second biscuit when the door opened and Cal stepped in, hat in hand. He looked the same as yesterday, dusty, weathered, steady as stone. His eyes found Lila and something in them eased, like he'd been half worried she might have vanished in the night. Morning, he said. You ready to see about those supplies? Lila swallowed her mouthful of biscuit. What kind of supplies? Traveling supplies? Bedroll? Trail food? A proper coat? Can't have you riding 2 days in just that dress. I don't have money for... It's an advance on your wages, Cal interrupted. You can't work if you freeze to death on the way to the ranch. Practical, not charity. Lila wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. She finished her breakfast, thanked Mrs. Cooper, and followed Cal out into the morning. Red Hollow looked different in daylight, smaller, scruffier, but somehow more real. Cal led her down the main street to the general store, a rambling building that smelled of leather and tobacco and dried herbs. The proprietor, a balding man with shrewd eyes, greeted Cal by name. Cal Mercer. Heard you were in town. What can I do for you? Need to outfit a traveler. Coat, bedroll, trail rations for 2 days. And boots if you've got them in her size. The proprietor's eyes shifted to Lila, taking in her worn dress and thin shoes. I've got what you need. This your daughter? Employee, Cal said flatly. Contracted legal through Judge Rowan. Ah. The proprietor's expression shifted. Less curiosity, more respect. Well then, let's get her set up proper. For the next hour, Lila was measured and fitted and assessed like a horse being outfitted for a long journey. The proprietor brought out a wool coat, heavy and warm, that fit well enough with the sleeves rolled. A pair of leather boots that were only slightly too large. Wear thick socks, the proprietor advised. A bedroll and a canteen, jerky and hardtack and dried apples for the trail. Cal paid for everything without comment, his face impassive as the proprietor tallied up the costs. That's $18 even, the proprietor said. Lila's stomach dropped. $18. More than a month's wages. She'd be in debt before she even started. Put it on my account, Cal said. I'll settle up next time I'm through. Surely will. Pleasure doing business with you, Cal. They left the store with Lila's new possessions bundled in her arms. She felt simultaneously grateful and trapped. Indebted now, tied to Cal by money as well as contract. I'll work it off, she said as they walked back toward the boarding house. That's the idea, Cal agreed. 6 months at $15 a month minus expenses puts you at $72 earned when the contract's done. That's a good stake for starting over, if that's what you want. $72. The number was incomprehensible. Lila had never imagined having that much money. What if I can't do the work? The fear slipped out before she could stop it. What if I'm not good enough? Cal stopped walking, turned to face her. Can you cook? Yes. Clean? Yes. Mend clothes, tend a garden, handle basic household tasks? Yes, but then you can do the work. I'm not expecting perfection, Lila. I'm expecting honest effort. That's all. They reached the boarding house. Cal's horse was saddled and waiting, along with a sturdy mule loaded with supplies. A wagon would have been more comfortable, but wagons were slow and conspicuous. Cal clearly wanted to move fast. We'll ride hard today, camp tonight, and reach the ranch by tomorrow evening, Cal said. You'll ride the mule. She's steadier than a horse and won't spook easy. Can you manage that? Lila eyed the mule doubtfully. The animal gazed back with the long-suffering expression of a creature that had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. I'll manage, Lila said. Cal helped her secure her new bedroll and supplies, then gave her a leg up onto the mule's back. The animal shifted but didn't protest. Cal swung onto his horse with easy grace and gathered the reins. One more stop, he said. Then we head out. They rode back to Judge Rowan's office. The judge was waiting outside, a sealed envelope in his hand. Your letter of introduction, he said, handing it up to Cal. Anyone questions you, show them this. And Miss Hart. He turned his sharp eyes on Lila. You remember what we talked about. You've got rights now. Don't let anyone tell you different. Yes, sir. Good girl. Cal, keep her safe. Plan to. They left Red Hollow at a steady walk, the morning sun warm on Lila's back, the mountains rising ahead like a promise or a threat. She couldn't yet tell which. The trail wound north through pine and scrub oak, climbing steadily into country that grew wilder with each mile. Lila had never been this far from Vera's house, had barely been beyond the boundaries of Copper Ridge in 3 years. The world felt enormous and strange, full of sounds she didn't recognize and spaces so open they made her dizzy. The mule plodded along with steady indifference, occasionally flicking her ears at a bird call or the rustle of wind through branches. Cal rode ahead, his posture relaxed but his eyes constantly scanning, reading the land the way Lila's father had once taught her to read the sky for coming weather. They didn't talk much. Cal seemed comfortable with silence, and Lila was too busy trying to stay balanced on the mule's broad back to make conversation. The new boots rubbed against her heels despite the thick socks, and her legs ached from the unfamiliar position. But the coat kept her warm, and the morning sun painted everything gold and green, and for the first time in years, Lila felt something other than afraid. Around midday, Cal reined in beside a creek that tumbled over smooth stones, the water clear and cold. He dismounted, loosened his horse's cinch, and gestured for Lila to do the same. "We'll rest here. Let the animals drink." Lila slid off the mule with less grace than she would have liked, her legs nearly buckling when her feet hit the ground. Cal pretended not to notice, busying himself with the saddlebags while she found her balance. "There's jerky and hardtack in your supplies," he said. "Help yourself. We won't stop again until evening." Lila dug out the food with stiff fingers. The jerky was tough and salty, the hardtack like eating sweetened wood, but her stomach didn't care. She ate standing up, watching the creek run over stones worn smooth by time and water. Cal filled both canteens, checked the horse's hooves, and scanned the surrounding trees with that same watchful attention. Lila wondered what he was looking for. Animals, people, trouble of some nameless kind. She'd grown up understanding that danger wore familiar faces and lived in your own house. This new kind of wariness, alert to threats that might come from anywhere, felt foreign and exhausting. "You doing all right?" Cal asked, not looking at her directly. "I'm fine." "Your feet hurt?" Lila glanced down at her new boots, surprised he'd noticed. "A little. Rub some tallow on them tonight. Inside the boot, I mean. Softens the leather, prevents blisters." "I don't have tallow." "I do. I'll show you." Such a small thing, the promise of tallow for her boots. But it settled warm in Lila's chest, a counterweight to the anxiety that had been her constant companion for so long. Someone was paying attention. Someone cared if her feet hurt. They mounted again and continued north. The trail grew steeper, winding through stands of aspen that shimmered silver green in the breeze. Lila's thighs burned from gripping the mule, and her back ached from holding herself upright, but she didn't complain. Complaining had never helped with Vera, and she wasn't about to start now with a man who'd shown her nothing but practical kindness. The afternoon wore on. The sun tracked west, painting long shadows across the trail. Cal maintained the same steady pace, not rushing, not dawdling, just covering ground with the efficiency of someone who'd made this journey many times before. It was late afternoon when Cal suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. His whole body had gone tense, his eyes fixed on something ahead that Lila couldn't see. "What is it?" she whispered. "Rider coming. Single horse, moving fast." Lila's heart kicked against her ribs. "Is that bad?" "Don't know yet. Stay behind me." Cal urged his horse forward a few paces, positioning himself between Lila and whatever was coming up the trail. His right hand dropped to rest on his thigh, close to where Lila now noticed a gun holstered at his hip. She hadn't seen him wearing it in town. He must have put it on before they left Red Hollow. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and then a horse came around the bend at a canter, a gray mare with lather on her shoulders, ridden by a man in a duster coat and a hat pulled low over his face. The rider pulled up short when he saw Cal blocking the trail. For a long moment the two men studied each other, and Lila felt the weight of some wordless assessment passing between them. "Cal Mercer," the stranger said finally, pushing his hat back to reveal a weathered face and cold blue eyes. "Been a while." "Hayes." Cal's voice had gone flat and hard. "What brings you out this way?" "Business. Heard there might be work up in Silverton." The man's eyes slid past Cal to Lila, and his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Who's your friend?" "None of your concern." "Just being friendly." Hayes leaned forward in his saddle, studying Lila with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Pretty girl. Looks young, though. Where'd you find her?" "I said it's none of your concern." Cal's hand stayed loose near his gun, but Lila could see the tension in his shoulders. "You got somewhere to be, Hayes. Best keep riding." Hayes held his gaze for another beat, that not smile still playing at his mouth. "Sure thing. But Mercer? Word of advice, traveling alone with a girl that young, people might get ideas, might think you're up to something that ain't quite legal." "Good thing I've got legal papers that say different." "That's so." Hayes straightened in his saddle. "Well then, guess you got it all figured out. Safe travels." He touched his hat brim in a mockery of courtesy and urged his horse past them. Lila watched him go, her heart pounding, waiting for Cal to relax. He didn't. Cal stayed rigid in the saddle until the sound of Hayes's horse had faded completely. Only then did he turn to look at Lila, his expression grim. "You know that man?" Lila asked. "I know of him. Barrett Hayes. He's a drifter, does odd work, some of it legal, most of it not. I've seen him in Red Hollow a few times over the years, usually when there's trouble brewing." "What kind of trouble?" Cal was quiet for a moment, his jaw working. "The kind that involves girls who disappear from frontier towns and turn up in mining camps, selling themselves because they got no other choice, or don't turn up at all." The words landed like stones in cold water. Lila understood what he wasn't saying, that Barrett Hayes was the kind of man who trafficked in human misery, who saw vulnerable women as commodities to be bought and sold and used up. "Is he going to come back?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Maybe. Probably not. He seemed to believe the bit about legal papers. But we're going to make camp early tonight, somewhere defensible, and you're going to stay close to me until we reach the ranch." They rode on, but the easy rhythm of the morning was gone. Cal pushed the pace faster, his eyes constantly scanning the trail behind them. Lila gripped the mule's mane with white-knuckled hands and tried not to imagine Barrett Hayes circling back in the dark. As the sun touched the western peaks, Cal led them off the main trail onto a smaller path that climbed steeply through thick pine. After 20 minutes of hard riding, they emerged into a small clearing protected on 3 sides by rock outcroppings. A fire ring of blackened stones suggested others had camped here before. "This'll do," Cal said, dismounting. "Good sightlines, hard to approach without being heard. We'll be safe here." Safe. Lila wanted to believe him. She slid off the mule on legs that shook with exhaustion and fear, nearly falling before Cal caught her elbow. "Easy. You did good today. Long ride for someone not used to it." "I'm fine." "You're worn out and scared, and that's fine too." Cal kept his hand on her elbow until she was steady. "Let's get camp set up. I'll show you how to do it proper so you can help next time." He worked with efficient, economical movements, unsaddling the animals, hobbling them so they could graze but not wander far, laying out the bedrolls on level ground away from the fire ring. Lila watched, trying to memorize the process, grateful for something to focus on besides the prickling sensation between her shoulder blades that said danger might be watching from the trees. "Gather kindling," Cal instructed. "Small stuff, twigs, dry grass, pine needles. Nothing bigger than your thumb. I'll get the larger wood." Lila moved around the clearing's edge, collecting kindling in her skirt. The task was familiar. She'd gathered wood for Vera's stove 1,000 times, and the familiar motions helped calm her racing heart. By the time she'd amassed a decent pile, Cal had returned with an armload of deadfall and was arranging larger logs near the fire ring. "Good," he said, examining her collection. "That'll catch quick. You ever build a fire from scratch?" "Vera always had me use matches." "We'll do it the old way. Good skill to have." Cal pulled out a knife and a piece of flint, showed her how to strike them together to create sparks, how to aim those sparks into the driest tinder. It took a dozen tries before a spark caught and a thin ribbon of smoke began to rise. Lila leaned in carefully, blowing gently like Cal had shown her, and was rewarded with a tiny flame. "There you go," Cal said, and there was approval in his voice. "Feed it slow, small stuff first." She built the fire twig by twig, watching it grow from that single fragile flame into a proper blaze. The heat felt good against her face, pushing back the evening chill. Cal added larger wood, and soon they had a fire that would burn for hours. "You hungry?" Cal asked. "Starving." He pulled out supplies from his saddlebag. Not just jerky and hardtack this time, but salt pork, beans, a small pot for cooking. "We'll have a proper meal tonight. Can't live on trail rations alone." Lila watched as he set the beans to soak in water from the creek, then sliced the salt pork thin and set it to sizzle in a pan balanced on the fire's edge. The smell made her mouth water. "Can I help?" "You can stir the beans once they start to boil. Keep them from sticking." They worked in companionable silence, the domestic routine familiar and comforting. Cal fried the pork until it was crispy, then used the grease to cook the beans. He added a pinch of something from a small pouch. Salt, Lila guessed, and maybe pepper. When the food was ready, he divided it onto 2 tin plates and handed one to Lila. She ate with her fingers, too hungry to care about manners. The beans were simple but good, the salt pork rich and savory. It was the best meal she'd had since leaving Red Hollow. Maybe the best meal she'd had in years. "Thank you," she said when she'd scraped the last of the beans from her plate. "For what?" "This, all of it. The food, the fire, She gestured vaguely at the camp. "Teaching me things." Cal looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "You'll be doing most of this yourself soon enough. Makes sense to learn it right." Full dark had fallen while they ate. Beyond the fire's circle of light, the forest was a wall of shadows and strange sounds. Wind in the pines, the hoot of an owl, something rustling in the underbrush that might have been a rabbit or might have been something larger. Lila edged closer to the fire. "You hear something?" Cal asked. "Everything. I've never been away from houses before. At night, I mean." "Takes getting used to." Cal pulled out the tallow he'd mentioned earlier, along with a rag. "Here, rub this on the inside of your boots where they're chafing. It'll help." Lila took off the boots, wincing as the leather pulled away from raw spots on her heels. The tallow was thick and waxy, smelling faintly of sheep. She rubbed it into the leather as Cal had instructed, working it in with her fingers. "That's good," Cal said. "Let them sit overnight. They'll be easier on you tomorrow." He banked the fire, added a larger log that would burn slow through the night, then moved to his bedroll. Lila watched as he pulled out his gun, checked it with practice motions, and laid it beside him within easy reach. "You expecting trouble?" she asked. "Always expect trouble. That way you're ready if it comes and pleasantly surprised if it doesn't." He settled into his bedroll, propping himself so he could see the approaches to the camp. "Get some sleep, Lila. I'll keep watch for a bit." "What about you? Don't you need to sleep?" "I'll sleep light. Old habit." Lila crawled into her own bedroll, surprised by how much warmer it was than she'd expected. The wool trapped heat from the fire, creating a cocoon that smelled like smoke and new fabric. Above her, stars crowded the sky in numbers she'd never seen, so many that they seemed to blur together into rivers of light. "Cal?" she said into the darkness. "Why did you really help me?" The silence stretched so long she thought he might not answer. The fire crackled. An owl called from somewhere in the trees. "I told you about my sister," Cal said finally. "Mary. What I didn't tell you is that I was there that day, the day she died." Lila held her breath. "I heard them fighting, my father and Mary. Heard him shouting, heard her crying. I was in the barn, supposed to be doing chores. I heard all of it, and I stayed in the barn because I was scared. Because I was 12 and small, and I didn't know what to do." His voice was flat, reciting facts like they'd happened to someone else. "I heard the crash when she fell, heard my father calling for help. By the time I got to the house, she was already gone. Broken neck, just like he said." "You were a child," Lila whispered. "It wasn't your fault." "Maybe not, but I've had 23 years to think about it, and you know what I learned? Being small doesn't excuse doing nothing. Being scared doesn't excuse turning away. There's always something you can do, even if it's just bearing witness, even if it's just refusing to pretend you don't see what's happening." "Is that why you stepped in with Vera? Because you wanted to do something this time?" "Partly, but it's more than that." Cal shifted in his bedroll, and Lila could see his profile against the fire's glow. Strong features, tired eyes. "I can't save everyone. Can't fix all the broken things in this world. But I can choose right now, in this moment, to do one good thing, to help one person who needs it. And maybe that doesn't balance the scales for Mary, but it's something. It's better than nothing." Lila thought about that, about the weight of old guilt, about choosing action over paralysis, about doing one good thing in a world that offered so many excuses for doing nothing. "You saved me," she said. "That's not nothing. You saved yourself. You're the one who walked out that door. I just opened it." "Maybe we both did it." "Maybe." She heard the faint smile in his voice. "Now get some sleep. Long ride tomorrow." Lila closed her eyes, listening to the fire snap and the wind move through the trees. Despite everything, the encounter with Barrett Hayes, the strangeness of sleeping under stars, The uncertainty of what waited at the end of this journey, she felt safer than she had in 3 years. Cal was a good man. Frank had been right about that. And for the first time, Lila let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, things could actually be different. She slept. She woke to the smell of coffee and the gray light of pre-dawn. Cal was already up, tending the fire, his movements quiet and efficient. When he saw her stirring, he poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Morning. We'll eat quick and get moving. Want to cover as much ground as possible before the heat of the day." Lila sat up, accepting the coffee gratefully. It was strong and bitter and perfect. They ate the last of the hardtack with jerky and dried apples, packed up the camp, and were on the trail before the sun had fully cleared the eastern peaks. The second day's ride was harder than the first. Lila's body ached in places she hadn't known could ache, and despite the tallow, her boots still rubbed. But the country they passed through was so beautiful it almost made up for the discomfort. Meadows carpeted in wildflowers, creeks that ran clear over colored stones, mountains rising in every direction like the ramparts of some vast cathedral. They stopped briefly at noon to rest the animals and eat, then pushed on. Cal remained watchful, but seemed less tense than yesterday, and Lila allowed herself to relax slightly. Maybe Barrett Hayes had indeed kept riding north. Maybe the danger had passed. It was late afternoon when they crested a ridge and Cal reined in, pointing down into the valley below. "There," he said, "Willow Bend Ranch." Lila followed his gesture. The valley was green and wide, with a creek winding through it like a silver ribbon. Near the creek stood a cabin, small but well-built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Beyond the cabin was a barn and a corral, and beyond that, meadows that stretched toward the mountains. It looked like something from a dream, like home might look if home were a place instead of a memory. "It's beautiful," Lila said. "It's work," Cal corrected, but she could hear the pride in his voice. "Needs constant tending, but it's good land, good water. A man could make a life here." Or a woman, Lila thought. A woman could make a life here too. They descended into the valley as the sun painted everything gold. By the time they reached the cabin, long shadows stretched across the grass and the air had gone cool and sweet with the smell of water and growing things. Cal dismounted, then helped Lila down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground, but she managed to stay upright through sheer stubbornness. "Come on," Cal said. "I'll show you inside. Then we'll see to the animals." He opened the cabin door, and a shape exploded from the shadows, low and fast and furry. Lila stumbled backward with a startled cry, and then the shape resolved into a dog, a big brindled hound with floppy ears and eyes full of joy. The dog ignored Cal entirely and made straight for Lila, shoving its head under her hand and whining with pleasure. "Duke," Cal said, surprised. "Easy, boy. You're gonna knock her over." But Duke had made his choice. He leaned against Lila's legs with his whole weight, tail wagging so hard his entire back end shook, looking up at her with an expression of complete adoration. "He likes you," Cal said, sounding bemused. "Usually takes him longer to warm to strangers." Lila knelt and wrapped her arms around Duke's neck, burying her face in his fur. The dog smelled like dust and dry grass and something indefinably good. He licked her ear, whining softly, and Lila felt something in her chest crack open, something that had been locked tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Hey," Cal said gently. "You all right?" Lila nodded against Duke's fur, not trusting her voice. She wasn't all right. She was overwhelmed and exhausted and terrified, and so grateful it hurt. But she was also, for the first time in years, exactly where she was supposed to be. She stood, wiping her eyes quickly. "I'm fine. What do you need me to do?" Cal studied her face, then seemed to decide not to push. "Help me with the animals. I'll show you where everything goes." They worked together in the fading light, unsaddling the horse and mule, brushing them down, turning them into the corral with fresh water and hay. Duke supervised the entire process, staying close to Lila's side like a self-appointed guardian. When the animals were settled, Cal showed her the barn, neat and organized, with tools hung on the walls and feed stored in sealed bins to keep out mice and weather. "Chickens are in the coop behind the barn," Cal said. "They'll need feeding morning and evening. I'll show you tomorrow. Tonight, we'll get you settled in the cabin." He led her inside. The cabin was simple but clean. One large room with a fireplace, a table and chairs, a washstand, and a bed in the corner. A ladder led up to a loft space beneath the rafters. "You'll take the bed," Cal said. "I'll sleep in the loft. Gives us both privacy." Lila looked at the bed, a real bed with a frame and a mattress and quilts. "That's your bed. And you're my employee, which means you need proper rest to do your work. I've slept in the loft plenty. It's comfortable enough." He was already climbing the ladder before Lila could argue further. She heard him moving around up there, and then he called down. "There's a wash basin and pitcher on the stand. Water from the well is good and cold. I'll get a fire started and we'll have supper." Lila set her flour sack on the bed and looked around the cabin that was going to be her home for the next 6 months, maybe longer if she chose to stay. The space was spare but not harsh, practical but not cold. It felt like a place where a person could breathe. Duke flopped down beside the bed with a contented groan, his eyes never leaving Lila's face. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear. Through the window, Lila could see the mountains going purple against the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. Cal descended from the loft and moved to the fireplace, building a fire with practiced ease. Soon warmth filled the cabin, pushing back the evening chill. "You did good today," he said, not looking at her. "Long ride, and you never complained once." "I survived worse than sore muscles." "I know, but that doesn't make this easy, and I wanted you to know I noticed." He hung a pot over the fire, added water and vegetables from a cold box near the door. "Tomorrow, we'll start the real work. I'll show you the routine, feeding animals, tending the garden, cooking, cleaning. Nothing you haven't done before, but doing it here, doing it for yourself. That'll be different." "Doing it for myself?" Cal looked at her then, his eyes serious. "This isn't Vera's house, Lila. You're not working to avoid punishment. You're working because that's the contract we made. Honest work for honest pay. And at the end of 6 months, you'll have money in your pocket and the freedom to choose what comes next. That's what doing it for yourself means." Lila nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. Freedom to choose. It still felt like a foreign language, but she was starting to learn the grammar. They ate stew made from root vegetables and salt pork, the same simple fare as the night before, but somehow better in the warmth of the cabin with Duke snoring softly beside the fire. After dinner, Lila washed the dishes while Cal showed her where everything was stored. Flour and sugar and coffee in sealed tins, tools and supplies organized with military precision. "I like things orderly," he said. "Not fussy, but orderly. Makes it easier to find what you need when you need it." "I can do orderly." "I know you can." Full dark had fallen by the time they finished. Cal climbed back up to the loft while Lila changed into her night shift behind the privacy of a blanket Cal had strung as a curtain. Duke stayed by her side, his warmth a comfort against the strangeness of this new place. She crawled into the bed, her bed, for the next 6 months at least, and pulled the quilts up to her chin. They smelled like cedar and fresh air, clean and good. "Lila?" Cal's voice drifted down from the loft. "Sleep well. You're safe here, I promise." "Thank you, Cal." She heard him settle into his own bedroll, heard the cabin creak and sigh as it cooled from the day's heat. Duke's breathing was steady and rhythmic. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods, making a sound like water over stones. Lila closed her eyes and let herself believe it. That she was safe, that she was home, that tomorrow would bring work instead of fear. For the first time in 3 years, she slept without nightmares. Lila woke to birdsong and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the softness of the mattress beneath her and the quiet that wasn't silence, just the ordinary sounds of a world going about its business without violence. Duke's wet nose pushed against her hand where it hung off the side of the bed, and she opened her eyes to find him watching her with patient devotion. Sunlight slanted through the window in golden bars. From the loft came the sounds of Cal moving around, and then his boots on the ladder rungs as he descended. He was already dressed, his hair damp like he'd washed at the well. "Morning," he said. "Didn't want to wake you, but the chickens won't wait much longer for their breakfast." Lila sat up quickly, embarrassed to have slept while Cal was already working. "I'm sorry, You should have rested after 2 hard days of riding, but now you're awake, so come on. I'll show you the routine." She dressed behind the blanket curtain, her body stiff and sore, but not unbearably so. When she emerged, Cal handed her a cup of coffee and a piece of bread with butter. "Eat while we walk. Chickens first, then I'll show you the garden and the well. After that, we'll work on breakfast proper." Lila followed him outside into a morning so clear and bright it hurt to look at. The valley stretched green in every direction, the creek sparkling in the sunlight, the mountains rising like sentinels against a sky so blue it seemed unreal. Duke bounded ahead, nose to the ground, investigating every interesting smell. The chicken coop was a sturdy structure behind the barn, with nesting boxes and roosting bars in a small yard enclosed by wire. A dozen hens scratched and clucked, eyeing Cal and Lila with the suspicious optimism of creatures who knew food came from humans but didn't entirely trust them. "Feed's in here," Cal said, opening a bin and scooping grain into a bucket. "Scatter it in the yard, not too thick. They'll fight over it otherwise." Lila took the bucket and did as instructed. The hens rushed forward in a flurry of feathers and indignant squawking, pecking at the grain with single-minded determination. One bold hen, a red one with a crooked tail feather, marched right up to Lila's boot and demanded more with an imperious cluck. "That's Rosie," Cal said. "She's the boss of that flock and knows it. Don't let her bully you or she'll never leave you alone." Lila scattered more grain, watching the hens work. "When do we collect eggs?" "Afternoons, usually. Mornings for feeding and watering. I'll show you how to check the nesting boxes later." He gestured toward the garden plot near the cabin. "Come on, this is where you'll be spending a good bit of your time." The garden was larger than Lila had expected, maybe a quarter acre, with neat rows of vegetables in various stages of growth. She recognized beans and squash, potatoes and carrots, tomatoes climbing stakes, and herbs she couldn't name by sight alone. "This needs weeding near daily," Cal said, kneeling to pull a stubborn dandelion from between potato plants. "And watering when it doesn't rain. The creek's close enough that hauling water isn't too bad, but it's still work." He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "You ever tend a garden?" Vera had one, smaller than this. "Then you know the basics. Plants need sun, water, and someone to keep the weeds from choking them out. Same as people, when you think about it." Lila hadn't thought about it, but now that Cal had said it, the comparison seemed apt. She'd been like a plant choked by weeds for 3 years, just barely surviving, never given room to grow. "What do you want me to do first?" she asked. "Today? Just learn where things are. Tomorrow we'll start the real work schedule." Cal led her to the well, showed her how to work the crank to bring up the bucket, how to prime the pump that fed water to a trough for the animals. "Water's good here, cold and clean, straight from the mountain. Don't waste it, but don't stint on it either. We've got plenty." They returned to the cabin, and Cal showed her the stores: flour and cornmeal, dried beans and salt pork, a precious jar of honey, coffee beans that needed grinding. The cold box held butter and eggs, a wheel of cheese, and vegetables from the garden. "I do my own cooking when I'm alone," Cal said, pulling out a cast-iron skillet. "But that was part of why I needed help. Ranch work doesn't leave much time for keeping house properly. You'll handle the cooking and cleaning, tending the garden, managing the chickens. I'll handle the livestock, repairs, and the heavier work." "Fair division." "What livestock?" "Horse and mule you've met. I've got 3 cows pastured up the valley, milk cows, so they'll need tending twice daily. And there's usually deer or elk to hunt come fall. We'll smoke the meat, dry what we can't eat fresh." Lila's head spun with information, but she nodded. She'd learned harder things than ranch keeping. At least here, mistakes wouldn't be met with a switch. They made breakfast together: eggs from the hens, fried potatoes, more coffee. Cal ate with efficient focus, already thinking ahead to the day's work. Lila ate more slowly, savoring the simple fact that there was enough food and no one would punish her for taking her time. "I need to ride up valley to check on the cows," Cal said when they'd finished. "You'll be all right here for a few hours?" Fear spiked through Lila's chest, quick and sharp. "Alone?" Cal paused, reading her face. "Duke will stay with you, and I won't be far, maybe an hour's ride. But if you're not comfortable yet, I can wait another day." Lila wanted to say she was fine, that she didn't need watching over like a child, but the words stuck in her throat because the truth was, she wasn't fine yet. The idea of being alone, even in this beautiful valley, even with Duke, made her feel untethered and afraid. "What if someone comes?" she asked quietly. "Like who?" "I don't know. Barrett Hayes or Vera, if she changed her mind about the money. Or anyone." Cal set down his coffee cup, giving her his full attention. "Lila, look at me." She met his eyes, steady, serious, kind. "Vera's not coming. She took the money and she's glad to be rid of you. Barrett Hayes has no idea where this ranch is, and even if he did, he's got no reason to come here. We're isolated, yes, but that's protection too. No one passes through this valley by accident. But what if the sky falls? What if the creek runs dry? What if a bear walks through that door?" Cal's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't live your whole life waiting for the next bad thing, Lila. I know that's what you had to do at Vera's, always watching, always braced for the blow. But you're not there anymore. You're here, where the only thing you need to worry about is whether the bread rises and if the chickens are laying. I don't know how to stop being afraid." "You don't stop all at once. You practice, little bits at a time." He stood, carried his plate to the wash basin. "So here's what we'll do. I'll go check the cows. That's work that needs doing. You'll stay here with Duke and practice being alone for 2 hours. If you get scared, Duke's meaner than he looks and twice as loyal. And when I get back, you'll have proved to yourself that you can do it." Lila gripped her own coffee cup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. 2 hours. 2 hours, then we'll have lunch, and I'll show you how to milk a cow. He gathered his hat and a rifle from its place above the door, then paused. "One more thing. You see anyone, and I mean anyone, you don't recognize, you take Duke and you hide. There's a root cellar behind the cabin covered with brush. Door's heavy, but you can lift it. Get in there and stay quiet until I come back." "You said no one comes here." "And I meant it, but careful beats sorry every time." He scratched Duke's ears. "Watch her, boy. Keep her safe." Duke woofed softly, as if he understood. Cal gave Lila one last assessing look, seemed satisfied with whatever he saw, and headed out. Through the window, she watched him saddle his horse and ride north up the valley, the rifle across his lap, until he disappeared into the tree line. The cabin felt very quiet. Lila stood in the middle of the room, listening to her own breathing, feeling the weight of solitude press against her like a physical thing. Duke whined and pushed his head under her hand. "Just you and me," Lila whispered. Duke's tail wagged. She washed the breakfast dishes, taking her time, making the task last. Then she swept the floor, shook out the quilts, organized the shelf where Cal kept his few books. Every few minutes she glanced out the window, half expecting to see some threat materializing from the trees. Nothing came. The sun climbed higher, birds sang in the cottonwoods. The creek burbled its endless song. Duke dozed in a patch of sunlight by the door, occasionally opening one eye to check that Lila was still there. When the cabin was as clean as she could make it, Lila ventured outside. The garden beckoned. She could weed for hours if she wanted. But first she walked the perimeter of the cabin, getting her bearings, looking for the root cellar Cal had mentioned. She found it behind the cabin, exactly where he'd said, a wooden door set into the ground at an angle, half covered with brush and grass. She pulled it open, peering down into darkness that smelled of earth and cold storage. Barrels and crates lined the walls, probably holding preserved food for winter. The space was small but adequate for hiding if needed. Lila closed the door and covered it again. Just knowing it was there made her feel slightly better. She spent the next hour in the garden, pulling weeds and learning the layout. The work was familiar and soothing, her hands in the dirt, the sun on her back. Duke supervised from the shade of a nearby tree, panting gently in the growing heat. She was wrist-deep in bean plants when Duke's head came up sharply, his ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Lila's heart stopped. She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her skirt, scanning the tree line. Duke's growl deepened, and he moved to stand between Lila and whatever he'd sensed. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Duke didn't answer, just kept staring at the trees south of the cabin, the opposite direction from where Cal had ridden. Lila's mind raced. Get to the root cellar. That's what Cal had said. Hide and wait. She took a step backward, and Duke moved with her, still focused on the trees. Another step. Another. They were almost to the cabin when a figure stepped out of the shadows between the pines. Barrett Hayes. He stood at the edge of the clearing, thumbs hooked in his belt, that same not smile on his face. He'd cleaned up since the trail, fresh shirt, shaved jaw, but his eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, predatory. "Well now," he called across the distance. "Fancy meeting you here." Lila's voice locked in her throat. Duke's growl became a full-throated bark, aggressive and warning. "Easy, dog," Hayes said, not moving. "I'm just being neighborly. Thought I'd check in, see how the girl's settling into her new situation." His eyes traveled over Lila, the cabin, the garden. "Looks like Mercer set you up nice. Real domestic, almost like you're playing house." "You need to leave." Lila forced the words out, proud when they didn't shake. "This is private property." "Is it now?" "Well, I don't see any fences. Don't see any signs. Just see a girl all alone with no one to protect her." Hayes took a step forward. Duke's barking became frantic. "Where's your employer, sweetheart? Off doing ranch work, leaving you all by yourself?" "He's coming back any minute." "That's so?" Hayes tilted his head, listening. "Funny, I don't hear any horses, don't see any dust. Seems to me you might be lying, and we both know what happens to girls who lie." He took another step forward. Lila backed up until she felt the cabin wall against her shoulders. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body was frozen, locked in the same paralysis that had gripped her 100 times in Vera's kitchen while the switch fell. Hayes was halfway across the clearing now, his smile widening. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to come with me real quiet-like. We're going to take a ride up to the mining camps where girls like you fetch good money. And by the time Mercer gets back, we'll be long gone, and he'll have no idea which direction to look." "No." The word came out small and weak. "No?" Hayes laughed. "Sweetheart, you don't get a say in this. You're just a bought girl, and bought girls go to whoever's got the money to claim them. Now, you can come willing, or I can drag you. Your choice." He was 10 feet away now. Duke planted himself in front of Lila, teeth bared, hackles raised. Hayes pulled out a gun, aimed it at the dog. "Move the mutt, or I'll shoot him." Something in Lila broke. Not fear this time, rage. Pure, burning rage at men who thought they could take whatever they wanted, who thought girls were cattle to be traded and sold, who thought violence was the answer to everything. "Duke, run!" she screamed. The dog didn't run. He launched himself at Hayes with a snarl that sounded like tearing metal. Hayes stumbled backward, trying to bring the gun around, but Duke was faster. 70 pounds of loyal fury hit Hayes in the chest, knocking him to the ground. The gun went flying into the grass. Lila ran. Not to the root cellar. That would trap her. Not into the cabin. Same problem. She ran for the barn. Duke's continued snarling and Hayes's cursing following her like demons. Her lungs burned. Her legs pumped. She could hear Hayes shouting, hear Duke yelping. Had he been kicked? Shot? She reached the barn and ducked inside, the dimness blinding her after the bright sun. She could hide in the loft or in one of the stalls, or... Her eyes landed on a pitchfork leaning against the wall. Lila grabbed it, the wooden handle solid and heavy in her hands. It wasn't a cottonwood switch. It wasn't Vera's fists. It was a weapon, and she was done being defenseless. She heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. Hayes appeared in the barn doorway, silhouetted against the light. He was breathing hard, his shirt torn, scratches on his face from Duke's claws. "The dog's got more fight than sense," he said, his voice tight with pain and anger. "But he's down now, and it's just you and me. So why don't you put down whatever you're holding and make this easy?" "Where's Duke?" Lila demanded, the pitchfork held level between them. "Kicked him good. He'll live, but he won't be bothering us." Hayes stepped into the barn, and Lila saw he'd retrieved his gun. It hung loose in his hand, not quite pointed at her, but ready. "Now I'm losing patience. Drop the fork." "No." "Girl, I will shoot you." "Then shoot me." Lila's voice was steady now, filled with a clarity she'd never felt before. "Because I'd rather be dead than go anywhere with you. I'd rather bleed out in this barn than spend 1 minute as your property. So if you want me, you're going to have to kill me. And then what? Dead girls don't fetch money in mining camps." Hayes stared at her, recalculating. His gun hand wavered slightly. "You're bluffing," he said. "Try me." They stood frozen in tableau, Hayes with his gun, Lila with her pitchfork, the barn full of dust motes and tension. Somewhere outside, Duke whimpered, and the sound broke something in Lila's chest. That dog had defended her, had thrown himself at danger without hesitation. The least she could do was hold her ground. "Last chance," Hayes said. "Come willing or come bleeding. Your choice." Lila adjusted her grip on the pitchfork. "My choice is you leave, now, while you still can." "While I still—" Hayes's laugh was ugly. "You think you scare me. You think a girl with a pitchfork is going to—" The shot came from outside, sharp and echoing. Hayes spun toward the sound, his gun coming up instinctively. A second shot kicked up dirt at his feet, and then Cal's voice rang across the clearing, hard as iron. "Drop the gun, Hayes, now!" Hayes froze. Through the barn door, Lila could see Cal on his horse, at the edge of the clearing, rifle aimed with deadly precision. His face was carved from stone, his eyes burning with controlled fury. "This isn't your business, Mercer," Hayes called. "Everything on this ranch is my business. You've got 3 seconds to drop that gun before I put a bullet through your knee. 1. She's just a girl you bought. 2. Hayes dropped the gun. "Good choice." Cal dismounted with lethal grace, his rifle never wavering from Hayes's center mass. "Now walk toward me. Slow. Hands where I can see them." Hayes obeyed, moving with the careful steps of a man who knew he was outmatched. When he reached the middle of the clearing, Cal spoke again. "Stop there. Lila, you all right?" "Yes." Her voice came out thin. "Duke, I see him. He's moving. Probably just stunned." Cal's eyes never left Hayes. "Now, Mr. Hayes, we're going to have a conversation about property law. That girl you just threatened, she's got legal papers signed by a circuit judge. She's employed, contracted, and under my protection. You touch her, you're committing assault. You try to take her, that's kidnapping. Both are hanging offenses in this territory." "I was just—" "Shut up. I'm not done." Cal's voice could have cut glass. "You came onto my land without permission. You threatened my employee. You assaulted my dog. Any one of those gives me legal right to shoot you where you stand. The only reason you're still breathing is I don't want to put Lila through watching a man die. But that's the only reason, so I suggest you don't test my restraint." Hayes's jaw worked, fury and fear warring in his face. "I was just trying to help her. Thought maybe she was here against her will. Then you'd have gone to the sheriff, not come creeping around trying to steal her. Try again." "Fine." Hayes spat into the dirt. "She's wasted here. Girl like that could make real money in the camps. I was offering her an opportunity." "Opportunity." Cal's laugh was bitter. "That what you call it when you drag girls north and sell them into brothels? When you promise them work and deliver them into slavery? That's not opportunity, Hayes. That's trafficking, and it ends now." He shifted his aim slightly, and Hayes actually flinched. "Here's what's going to happen," Cal continued. "You're going to walk back into those trees. You're going to get on whatever horse you rode in on, and you're going to leave this valley and never come back. If I see you on my land again, I shoot first and bury you quiet. If I hear you've bothered Lila or any other girl, I'll hunt you down myself. We clear?" "Crystal," Hayes said through gritted teeth. "Then get moving." Hayes backed toward the trees, hands still raised, his eyes promising violence. When he reached the shadows, he turned and disappeared. They heard the sound of a horse being mounted, hoofbeats fading north. Cal stayed frozen, rifle ready, for a full minute after the sounds had died. Only then did he lower the weapon and turn to Lila. "You can put down the pitchfork now," he said gently. Lila looked down at her hands, surprised to find them still gripping the wooden handle. Her knuckles were white, her arms shaking with delayed reaction. She set the pitchfork against the barn wall and stumbled outside. Duke was sitting up near the cabin, dazed but alive. When he saw Lila, he tried to stand, whimpered, and sat back down. Lila ran to him, dropping to her knees, running her hands over his ribs and legs, checking for broken bones or bleeding. "Easy, boy," she murmured. "Easy. You're okay. You're going to be okay." Cal crouched beside them, his hands joining hers in the examination. "Nothing broken. Just bruised, I think. Tough old dog." He tried to protect me," Lila said, tears streaming down her face now that the danger had passed. "He didn't even hesitate." "That's what Duke does, protects the people he loves." Cal's hand settled warm on her shoulder. "Same as I do," And Lila, you did exactly right. You fought. You didn't freeze or fold. You fought. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. He helped her to her feet. Come on, let's get Duke inside and you settled. Then I'm writing to the sheriff to report what happened. Hayes won't bother us again, but I want it on record in case he tries something elsewhere. They carried Duke into the cabin. He was heavy but docile, trusting them to handle him. Cal laid him on a blanket by the fire and brought water. Duke lapped at it weakly, then laid his head on Lila's lap with a sigh. Stay with him, Cal said. I'll be back before dark. You've got the rifle if you need it. Cal? Lila caught his hand. Thank you for coming back, for believing me, for not, her voice broke, for not being like him. Cal's expression softened into something that wasn't quite a smile but held warmth anyway. You don't have to thank me for being decent, Lila. That's just the baseline for humanity. He squeezed her hand once, then released it. I'll be back soon. You're safe now. He left, and Lila sat with Duke as the afternoon light shifted through the windows. She stroked the dog's fur, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her palm, and thought about Barrett Hayes and Vera and all the people who thought they had the right to claim other people's lives. She thought about Cal, who'd ridden back at exactly the right moment, or maybe not exactly. Maybe he'd never planned to be gone 2 full hours. Maybe he'd circled back to check on her, trusting her to handle an hour alone, but not willing to risk her safety completely. She thought about the pitchfork and the steadiness in her own voice when she'd told Hayes she'd rather die than submit. And she realized that somewhere in the last few days, something fundamental had shifted. She'd been a thing to be sold, then a person to be protected. But in that barn, facing Barrett Hayes with a pitchfork and fury, she'd become something else entirely. She'd become someone who protected herself. Duke whined softly, and Lila leaned down to press her forehead against his. We're going to be all right, boy, she whispered. Both of us. We're going to be just fine. Outside, the sun continued its arc across the sky. The chickens scratched and clucked. The creek ran its eternal course, and in the cabin at Willowbend Ranch, a girl and a dog kept each other company while the world proved, slowly but surely, that safety could be more than just a dream. Cal returned just as the sun touched the western peaks, painting the valley in shades of copper and gold. Lila heard the horse before she saw it, and her body tensed automatically before she recognized the steady, unhurried rhythm of Cal's gelding. Duke lifted his head from her lap, tail thumping weakly against the floor. The door opened and Cal stepped inside, his face tired but satisfied. He hung his hat on the peg and leaned his rifle against the wall before kneeling beside Duke to check the dog's condition. How's he doing? Better. He drank some water and ate a little bread I soaked in broth. Mostly, he's been sleeping. Good. Sleep's the best medicine for what ails him. Cal scratched behind Duke's ears with gentle fingers. Tough old boy. He'll be back to normal in a day or two. What did the sheriff say? Cal settled into the chair across from Lila, stretching his legs out with a sigh that spoke of long hours in the saddle. Sheriff wasn't in town, off dealing with some dispute over mining claims, but I filed a written report with his deputy, a man named Carson, who's solid enough. Told him everything that happened. Carson said he'd put out word that Barrett Hayes is wanted for questioning regarding attempted kidnapping and trespassing. Won't amount to much unless Hayes is fool enough to show his face in Red Hollow again, but it's on record now. Do you think he'll come back here? No. Cal's certainty was absolute. Hayes is a predator, but he's not stupid. He knows I'll shoot him if he sets foot on this property again, and he knows there's legal backing for it now. He'll move on to easier targets. His jaw tightened. Which is the part that sits wrong with me. He'll find some other girl who doesn't have protection. We can't save everyone. Lila echoed Cal's own words back to him and saw his mouth quirk in recognition. No, we can't. But I made sure Carson understood that Hayes is dangerous and should be watched. That's all I can do. He stood, moved to the cold box. You eat anything since I left? I wasn't hungry. You need to eat anyway. Fear burns energy same as hard work. He pulled out eggs and the leftover beans from the night before. I'll make us something quick. Lila watched him work, the domestic routine soothing after the violence of the afternoon. Cal moved with the same efficient calm he brought to everything. No wasted motion, no fuss, just food prepared and served. They ate in comfortable silence, Duke snoring softly by the fire, the cabin settling into evening quiet. When the dishes were washed and put away, Cal climbed halfway up the ladder to the loft, then paused. "Lila, I need to say something." She looked up from where she was preparing her bed. "What?" "I'm sorry for leaving you alone when you weren't ready, for not checking the perimeter before I rode out, for underestimating how bold Hayes might be." His voice was rough with self-recrimination. "I put you in danger through carelessness, and that's on me." "You came back," Lila said quietly. "You came back before anything really bad happened. I should never have left in the first place. Not until you felt safe." Lila considered this, turning it over in her mind. Part of her wanted to agree, to blame Cal for the fear she'd felt, to make him carry the weight of what had almost happened. But that wasn't fair. And more importantly, it wasn't true. "Cal, look at me." He did. "I'm not a child. I'm not helpless. You gave me tools to protect myself. You showed me the root cellar, left Duke with me, made sure I knew where the rifle was. What happened today wasn't because you were careless. It was because Barrett Hayes is a bad man who makes bad choices. That's on him, not you. You're being generous. I'm being honest, and I need you to hear this. I'm glad you left me alone. Not because of Hayes, but because I got to prove to myself that I could handle it. I didn't hide in the root cellar. I didn't freeze. I fought." Pride flickered warm in her chest. "For the first time in my life, I stood up to someone trying to hurt me, and I didn't back down. That's worth something." Cal studied her face for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of the truth in her words. "You're stronger than you know," he said finally. "I'm learning that." He nodded once and climbed the rest of the way to the loft. Lila changed into her night shift and settled into bed, Duke immediately relocating to sleep on the floor beside her. Through the window, she could see stars emerging one by one, turning the sky into a field of distant light. She fell asleep feeling safer than she had any right to, considering the day's events. But safety, she was learning, wasn't the absence of danger. It was the presence of people and choices and strength you didn't know you had until you needed it. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with frost sparkling on the grass. Lila woke to find Cal already outside tending to the animals, Duke limping along beside him like nothing had happened beyond a bad dream. She dressed quickly and joined them, falling into the rhythm Cal had shown her: chickens fed, garden watered, breakfast made. Over the next week, they established a routine that felt less like work and more like the natural order of things. Lila learned to milk the cows, to collect eggs without getting pecked, to tell which vegetables were ready for harvest and which needed more time. She learned to make bread that didn't come out like stone, to preserve vegetables in brine for winter, to mend Cal's work shirts with stitches small and strong. Cal taught her to shoot the rifle, standing behind her to adjust her stance, his voice patient as he explained about breathing and sight alignment and the kick she needed to expect. The first time she hit the target, a knot on a dead tree 50 yards away, he actually smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Natural talent," he said, "or good instruction." "Probably good instruction." "Definitely the instruction," Lila replied, and felt something warm unfold in her chest at the easy teasing. They worked together and ate together and existed in a companionable peace that Lila had never experienced before. There was no walking on eggshells, no bracing for violence, no feeling that she was one mistake away from punishment. When she burned the cornbread, Cal just scraped off the black parts and ate it anyway. When she forgot to close the chicken coop and 3 hens got loose, he helped her round them up without a single harsh word. It was during one of these ordinary evenings, Lila mending by firelight while Cal read from one of his books, that she finally asked the question that had been building in her mind. "What happens at the end of 6 months?" Cal looked up from his book. "What do you mean?" "The contract. It ends in 6 months. What happens then?" "That depends on what you want." He set the book aside, giving her his full attention. "You can renew the contract if you want to stay. You can take your wages and leave if you want to start fresh somewhere else. You can negotiate different terms if the current ones don't suit. It's your choice. And what do you want? Cal was quiet for a moment, his eyes reflecting the firelight. I want you to have what you need to build a good life. If that's here, then I'd be glad to have you stay. You're good at this work, and more than that, you make this place feel less lonely. But if it's somewhere else, then I want you to have the freedom and the means to go there. You wouldn't be angry if I left? Why would I be angry? You don't owe me your life, Layla. You owe me 6 months of honest work, which you've been giving me from day one. Anything beyond that is a choice, not an obligation. Lila bent her head over the shirt she was mending, her throat tight with emotion she couldn't quite name. No one's ever given me choices before. Then it's past time someone did. They fell back into comfortable silence, but Lila's mind churned with possibilities. 6 months had seemed like an eternity when she'd signed the contract in Judge Rowan's office. Now, 2 weeks into her employment, it felt simultaneously too long and not long enough. Too long because she was impatient to be completely free, to have her own money and her own future. Not long enough because she was just beginning to understand what it felt like to live without fear, and she wasn't ready to give that up. The answer, she realized, was that she didn't have to decide yet. She had time. She had choices. And for now, that was enough. The weeks rolled into a month, then 2. Summer deepened into the kind of golden abundance that made the valley feel like a painting. Gardens heavy with vegetables, chickens laying prolifically, the cows fat and content. Lila's hands developed calluses that didn't hurt, her body grew strong from daily work, and her face lost the hollow, hunted look that had defined it for so long. She learned the names of the mountains that ringed the valley. Sentinel Peak to the north, Widow's Crown to the east, Beartooth to the south. She learned the rhythms of the weather, how to read the sky for coming rain, how to smell snow on the wind even in August when it was weeks away. She learned that Duke would eat absolutely anything she offered him, but had a particular fondness for bacon grease on bread, and that Cal took his coffee black and strong enough to strip paint. She learned slowly what it felt like to be valued for something other than her usefulness or her submission. It was a late afternoon in early September when everything changed again. Lila was in the garden harvesting the last of the summer squash when Duke's ears pricked forward. He didn't growl this time, his tail was wagging, but he stood and trotted toward the southern trail with clear interest. Lila straightened, shading her eyes against the slanting sun. A rider was approaching, and as the figure drew closer, she recognized the weathered face and white hair of Judge Rowan. "Miss Hart," the judge called as he reined in near the garden. "Good to see you looking well." "Judge Rowan." Lila brushed dirt from her hands and approached. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Official business, though not the unpleasant kind. Is Cal around?" "In the barn. I'll fetch him." She found Cal repairing a broken stall door, told him about their visitor, and followed him back outside. The judge had dismounted and was letting Duke sniff his boots with grave courtesy. "Judge," Cal said, shaking the older man's hand, "this is unexpected. I was making the circuit anyway. 3 disputes to settle in Silverton, 1 in Copper Ridge. Thought I'd swing by, check on how things are working out." His sharp eyes moved between Cal and Lila. "So, how are things working out?" "Well," Cal said, "Lila's a hard worker and quick to learn. No complaints on my end." "And you, Miss Hart? Any complaints on yours?" Lila met the judge's gaze steadily. "None. Cal's been fair and respectful. The work's hard but honest. She paused, searching for the right words. "I'm content here." "Content." The judge smiled slightly. "That's high praise from someone who had every reason to expect the worst." "Good. That's very good." He pulled a packet of papers from his saddlebag. "I've got the quarterly review here, standard contract procedure. We go over the terms, make sure both parties are satisfied, document any concerns. Shouldn't take more than an hour." They settled on the porch with coffee and the last of Lila's blackberry preserves on bread. The judge reviewed the contract point by point, asking detailed questions about wages, working conditions, and living arrangements. He asked Cal if Lila was performing her duties adequately. He asked Lila if she felt safe and fairly compensated. To every question, both of them answered honestly and positively. "Well then," Judge Rowan said finally, signing his name on the review document, "everything appears to be in order. Lila, you're 4 months into your contract now. You've earned $60 in wages. Cal's been holding it in trust as stipulated, and you can claim it anytime you choose, or let it accumulate until the contract ends." $60. The number staggered Lila. She'd never imagined having that much money. It represented freedom in a way nothing else could. The freedom to leave, to start over, to make choices based on what she wanted rather than what she could survive. "I'll let it accumulate," she said. "Wise choice. Compound security." The judge tucked the papers away. "Now, there's one other matter I wanted to discuss. Cal, you remember when we talked about making this arrangement permanent?" Cal's expression went carefully neutral. "I remember you suggesting it. I said it would be Lila's choice." "What arrangement?" Lila looked between them, confused. Judge Rowan leaned back in his chair, his eyes kind but serious. "The law's a funny thing, Miss Hart. Right now you're protected because you've got a legal contract and Cal's good name backing it. But contracts end. When yours does, you'll be on your own again, legally speaking. A young woman alone is vulnerable in ways a young woman with family isn't." "I don't have family. That's what I'm getting at. There's a legal mechanism that could change that. If Cal were willing to adopt you as his ward, make it official through the courts, you'd have the protection of his name and legal standing beyond the contract period. You'd have the right to inherit, the right to family legal representation, and the social protection that comes with being known as someone's daughter rather than someone's former employee." The words landed like stones into still water. Lila stared at the judge, then at Cal, trying to process what was being suggested. "You want to adopt me?" she asked Cal. "I want you to have options," Cal said carefully. "The judge is right that your legal position is uncertain after the contract ends. If you wanted the security of being legally connected to someone who could vouch for you, protect you, help you navigate the world, then yes, I'd be willing to make that official, but only if you wanted it." "What would it mean, practically?" Judge Rowan answered. "Practically, it means Cal would have legal responsibility for your welfare until you reach majority age or marry. You'd have the right to use his surname if you chose. His property would pass to you if he died intestate. And most importantly, anyone who wanted to harm you would have to go through him, legally and literally." "But I'd still have my wages, my freedom to leave?" "Absolutely. Adoption doesn't mean ownership. It means family." The judge's voice gentled. "Look, I've seen too many young women in your position end up in bad situations because they had no legal protections and no one to stand up for them. This would give you both. You'd have Cal's protection and your own independence. Best of both worlds, if you ask me." Lila's mind raced. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. The security was tempting, the idea of having someone legally bound to care about her welfare even more so. But another part of her hesitated. She'd just gotten free. Did she really want to tie herself to someone new, even someone as good as Cal? "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course," Cal said immediately. "This isn't something to rush. Judge, when would you need an answer?" "Next circuit, 3 months from now. That gives Miss Hart time to consider and you both time to see how the rest of the contract period plays out." Judge Rowan stood, brushing crumbs from his vest. "I should get moving. Need to make Copper Ridge before full dark. But Lila, whatever you decide, know that you've got people looking out for you now. That's worth more than all the legal papers in the world." They watched him ride south until he disappeared into the trees. Cal turned to Lila, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he said. "And you don't have to say yes just because you think it's what I want or because you're grateful. This is your life. You get to choose how to live it." "What do you want?" Lila asked again. "Really?" Cal looked out over the valley, his eyes distant. "I want you to be safe. I want you to have a future where you're not always looking over your shoulder, wondering if someone like Barrett Hayes or Vera is going to appear and drag you back into hell. If making you my legal ward accomplishes that, then yes, I want it. But I also want you to feel free. And if tying yourself to me legally feels like another cage, then I don't want it at all. It wouldn't be a cage if you're not a jailer. No, it wouldn't, but you're the only one who can decide that for sure. Lila nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Good. Now, those squash aren't going to harvest themselves, and I've got a stall door that's being stubborn. We've got work to do. They returned to their respective tasks, but Lila's mind churned with the judge's offer as she worked. Family. She'd had a family once, a father who loved her, a mother who'd died too soon. Then she'd had Vera, who taught her that family could be the cruelest cage of all. But Cal wasn't Vera. Cal was steady and kind and had never once raised his voice to her, let alone his hand. Cal had given her choices and wages and the freedom to build a life on her own terms. The question wasn't whether Cal was trustworthy. The question was whether Lila was ready to trust anyone that completely ever again. She didn't have an answer yet, but she had time to find one. The weeks continued their steady march toward autumn. The air grew crisp at night, and the aspen on the mountainsides began to turn gold. Lila and Cal harvested the garden, preserving and storing food for winter. They smoked venison from a deer Cal shot, dried herbs, put up jar after jar of vegetables in brine and syrup. Duke grew fat on scraps and attention, and the chickens settled into their winter rhythms. Through it all, Lila thought about the judge's offer. She watched how Cal treated her, with respect and patience and a fundamental decency that never wavered. She watched how he treated the animals, the land, even the tools he used, with care and attention, as if everything deserved to be handled properly. She thought about what it would mean to have a name that meant something, to be Lila Mercer instead of Lila Hart, to have legal standing and protection and the weight of Cal's reputation backing her up when she needed it. And slowly, over the course of those autumn weeks, she realized something important. She wasn't afraid of Cal. She trusted him. Not because he'd earned it through grand gestures, but because he'd earned it through 1,000 small moments of consistency. He was who he said he was, day after day after day. That was worth more than any legal document. It was late October when Cal came in from evening chores to find Lila sitting at the table with a piece of paper in front of her. She'd been practicing her letters, writing her name over and over in different variations. Lila Hart, Lila Marie Hart, Lila Mercer, Lila Marie Mercer. Cal hung his coat and moved to wash at the basin, pointedly not looking at the paper. But Lila saw his eyes flick to it, saw the question he didn't ask. "I've been thinking," she said. "About?" "The adoption. What Judge Rowan suggested." Cal's hands stilled in the water. He dried them slowly, then turned to face her. "And? I want to ask you something first, and I need you to be honest." "Always am." "Why do you really want to do this? And don't tell me it's just for my protection. There's got to be more to it than that." Cal pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his hands clasped on the table. For a long moment he didn't speak, just looked at her with those steady gray-green eyes. "You want the truth?" he said finally. "The whole truth?" "That's what I'm asking for." "All right." He took a breath. "This ranch is a good place. It's beautiful and productive and everything I worked for. But it's lonely. I'm 35 years old and I live alone except for a dog and some livestock. I eat meals by myself, I work from dawn to dark, and at the end of the day there's no one to talk to except Duke, and he's a terrible conversationalist." Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Lila felt her mouth twitch. "Then you showed up," Cal continued, "and suddenly this place feels less like just a ranch and more like a home. There's bread baking and curtains on the windows and someone to share coffee with in the mornings. There's laughter sometimes, and conversation, and the knowledge that I'm not completely alone in the world. That's selfish, maybe. But it's true." "That's not selfish," Lila said softly. "It is if I'm asking you to stay because I'm lonely. That's not fair to you." "What if I'm lonely too? What if having someone who actually cares whether I'm safe and fed and happy means as much to me as it does to you?" Cal's expression shifted, surprise and hope, and something deeper. "Then maybe we're both getting something we need out of this arrangement." "Maybe we are." Lila traced her finger over one of the names she'd written. Lila Marie Mercer. "I have conditions, though, if I agree to this." "Name them." "First, I finish my contract. All 6 months. I earn my full wages and I keep them. This adoption doesn't erase the work I've done or the money I'm owed." "Agreed." "Second, If at any point I want to leave, to marry or travel or just start over somewhere else, you don't stop me. You give me your blessing and whatever help I need to do it safely. Agreed. Third, we tell people the truth. I'm not your daughter by blood, and I won't pretend I am. I'm your ward, legally adopted for protection and practical reasons. I won't lie about where I came from or what this arrangement really means. Cal nodded. Honesty's always been my policy. Anything else? Just one more thing. Lila met his eyes. You have to promise me that you'll never use this adoption as leverage. Never use it to control me or make decisions for me or treat me like property just because the law says you can. I need to know that even with legal papers, I'm still free. Lila. Cal's voice was rough with emotion. I swear to you, on my sister's memory and everything I hold sacred, that I will never use any power I have over you to harm you or control you. You will always be free to make your own choices. Always. That's not a condition. That's a promise. Lila looked at him for a long moment, reading his face, testing the words for truth. She found no deception, no hidden agenda, no cruelty waiting beneath the surface. Then yes, she said. When Judge Rowan comes back, tell him I agree. Cal's face transformed with a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. You're sure? I'm sure. I want a family, a real one based on choice and respect, and I think... Her voice wavered slightly. I think we could be that for each other. Cal stood and moved around the table, and for a moment Lila thought he might hug her. Instead, he offered his hand, the same gesture he'd made in Vera's kitchen all those months ago. She took it. His grip was warm and solid and steady, and Lila realized this was what safety felt like. Not the absence of risk, but the presence of someone who would face risk with you and never ask you to face it alone. Welcome to the family, Cal said quietly. Thank you for having me. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, two people who'd found in each other what they'd been missing. Then Duke, jealous of the attention he wasn't receiving, shoved his head between them with an indignant woof. They both laughed, and the moment broke into something lighter and easier. Lila released Cal's hand and knelt to give Duke the attention he demanded, and Cal started supper, and the cabin filled with the ordinary sounds of home. 3 months later, on a cold January morning with snow falling soft outside the windows, Judge Rowan stood in the cabin at Willow Bend Ranch and made it official. Cal signed the adoption papers with his blocky handwriting. Lila signed with the careful script her father had taught her, writing Lila Marie Mercer for the first time in an official capacity. The judge stamped the documents with his seal, then shook both their hands. Congratulations, he said. You're family now. Not that you weren't before, but now the law recognizes it. He tucked the papers into his satchel. Miss Mercer, I have to say, you look like a completely different person than the girl I met in my office last summer. Healthier, stronger, happier. I am all those things, Lila said, thanks to Cal, and to you for giving me the legal protection to build a new life. I just facilitated. You and Cal did the hard work. The judge accepted a cup of coffee from Cal. So what's next for you two? More of the same, Cal said. Ranch doesn't run itself, and we've got 3 new calves coming in spring that'll need tending. And I'm going to learn to ride properly, Lila added. Cal says it's past time I stopped looking like a sack of potatoes on a mule. I said no such thing. You implied it, Judge Rowan laughed. It's good to see you both so settled. And Lila, remember, you've got your wages saved, you've got legal standing, and you've got choices. Don't ever forget that. I won't. After the judge left, Lila and Cal stood on the porch watching the snowfall. Duke lay at their feet, content and warm. The valley was white and peaceful, the mountains standing guard like they always had and always would. You know what's strange? Lila said after a while. What? 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be standing here, free, safe, with money in my pocket and a name I chose, I wouldn't have believed them. It would have seemed impossible. But here you are. Here I am. She looked up at Cal. Thank you. For seeing me when everyone else looked away. For stepping in when you could have walked past. For giving me a chance to become someone other than the scared girl in Vera's kitchen. You were always more than that girl, Cal said. You just needed the space to grow into who you were meant to be. Maybe. But you gave me that space. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform the valley into something magical and new. Lila thought about the girl she'd been, beaten and afraid, and convinced the world had nothing better to offer. She thought about the woman she was becoming, strong and capable, and finally free. She thought about Barrett Hayes, wherever he was, and Vera drinking away the money she'd gotten for a stepdaughter she'd never valued. She thought about the minister's wife who'd told her to pray harder, and the sheriff who'd walked away from her bruises, and all the people who'd decided her suffering wasn't their business, and she forgave them. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because carrying that anger would be like carrying Vera's house on her back wherever she went. She was free of that place. She wanted to be free of the weight too. "Cal," she said, "what do you think makes a family, really?" He considered the question seriously. "I think family is the people who show up, the people who stay, the people who see you at your worst and decide you're worth fighting for anyway. Blood might make you related, but choice makes you family." "Then I choose you," Lila said. "I choose this ranch, this life, this future. Not because I'm obligated or because I have nowhere else to go, but because it's where I want to be. And I choose you right back." They went inside as the snow fell heavier, closing the door against the cold and the dark and everything that had come before. Duke settled by the fire. Cal made hot coffee. Lila pulled out the mending that was never quite finished on a working ranch. And in the warm cabin at Willow Bend Ranch, beneath mountains that had stood for millennia and would stand for millennia more, two people who'd found each other against all odds built the kind of family that mattered. Not the kind you were born into, but the kind you chose. The kind built on respect and trust and the simple, radical act of showing up for each other, day after ordinary day. The kind that lasted. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering everything in white. The chickens roosted warm in their coop, the cows sheltered in the barn. The creek ran beneath a skin of ice, still flowing, still moving forward like time itself. And Lila Marie Mercer, who had once been Lila Hart, and before that had been just a scared girl with no choices and no hope, sat in the firelight and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Home wasn't a place you were born into. It was a place you built, one choice at a time, with people who saw your worth and gave you room to grow. And this cabin, this valley, this life was home. Finally, truly, and completely home.